Hi everyone, I am William Jamal Wright,
And I'm Hattie.
and this is our podcast, HattieJo. So we're sitting here chilling in Arizona, our second official episode out here.
Yep.
And
We finally have some decorations up.
true, a little bit, not so bare walls and
Yeah.
whatnot, getting settled in a little bit here into a little bit of a routine. I have started
Quarantine routine. Yeah.
I have started orientation for my
your new job.
Yeah, so excuse me. Everything is kind of getting into a little bit of normalcy around here. Getting paychecks coming in and whatnot.
Yeah.
But
Always good.
So we actually we are going to continue with our theme for 2020 of talking about emotions. And kind of similar to what we did last month with talking about like the emotions of the time.
The time being Black Lives Matter, even
Yes.
though I'd like to point out it's always Black Lives Matter. It's not just, oh, last month was Black Lives Matter. Like,
Yes.
that one is one that is eternal.
Very true. Well, there was recently an ESPN 30 for 30 podcast. They released a series on Marta Caroli and
Marta and Bella Caroli.
My bad. And their dynasty and kind of viewing USA Gymnastics kind of journey to being the world dominant in gymnastics.
Yes, and as you can tell by my shirt that one of my lovely gymnasts gave me as a Christmas gift. Love it, love it, love it. Or it might have been a goodbye graduation gift actually, but very thankful for this gymnast and for this shirt.
Yeah.
But I thought it would be appropriate to wear given our topic today was gymnastics.
Yeah.
It's a very important one in our lives.
Yeah.
But yeah, actually, so the 30 for 30 series, a series of podcasts, there's 7. They each range from like 35 to 45 minutes roughly. It's called Heavy Metals. Metals, MEDALS, like the medals that you win, not metal like you, METALS, like the metal that you build something with. But anyway, yeah, I thought it was really interesting. So in addition to that coming out, also recently a Netflix documentary called Athlete A has come out, also exploring just kind of the issues at hand. So I think today we're going to focus on we might not focus on anything, but just to give a little bit of background, hopefully you're aware that there's been a huge sex abuse scandal in USA Gymnastics. This is not unique to gymnastics. There's sex abuse scandals in all sorts of sports.
And religions.
And institutions.
Yeah.
And school, like all sorts of things. So I think a common misconception is like, oh, I'm never putting my child in gymnastics. I don't want them to have like sexual abuse. And it's like, well, then they're gonna have to stay at home with like no one, because it can happen in any organization
or arena.
Yeah, that has children. So that's something I would love to see change, where we can be confident that our children are safe. But at the moment, I don't think it's fair to shy away from a particular sport because you think a certain other sport is safe, it's really just because the scandal hasn't come out yet.
Yeah.
So anyway, as a result of that Larry Nassar scandal, there have been a lot of investigations into how this occurred.
Yeah,
How was
how is
it
it
that
possible?
he could abuse so many people for so long and not get caught? And there's I think a myriad of things at play. But one of the things at play, and that was specifically looked at in this Heavy Metals podcast, was the top tier coaches at the head of the elite gymnastics organization. So the organization is USAG, so USA Gymnastics, and the national team coordinators and coaches for a long period of time were either Marta or Bella Caroli. Whereas I think athlete A has a little bit different focus, which is more on a particular gymnast, and she being one of the ones to really bring forth, speak out about the abuse.
Yeah. And they covered that
and
a
kind
little
of
bit.
her journey.
Yeah, and they covered that a little bit in the 30 for 30.
Yeah.
And I think it was it 2016?
2015.
2015.
Yeah.
But wasn't the Olympics that she was Maggie Nichols?
Up for, yeah. So the Olympic team she was trying to make was 2016.
Yeah.
But she first spoke out, and the USA Gymnastics organization first knew about it in 2015.
Yeah.
Anyhow, so athlete A has a slightly different focus, but it contains a lot of the same elements and things. So if you're interested, I think that's a great documentary to watch. Free on Netflix. Also, there's the Heart of Gold documentary. I forget where that is available. But again, it just shows a lot about the culture of elite gymnastics, and I think that is what played a big role in allowing. It was one of the key ingredients for this whole sex abuse scandal to occur. Yeah. And so the 30 for 30 podcast specifically is looking at, okay, the culture of USA Gymnastics, where did that come from? And specifically in the elite programs. But I think there is a lot of trickle down from elite to like the JO stuff that I coached at and I competed at as a child. And part of that is because, usually the gyms that have an elite, they don't make money just from one gymnast, right? So they have to have a whole program with rec kids, preschool kids, teen girls, they have
people
a
that
huge
are just
gym,
doing it for fun, and people that want to be competitive.
And people that want to be competitive, and then there's a whole spectrum of levels at which they're competitive, right? And
so there really
the elite
is
just that one part. But usually the coaches that coach elite also coach a large majority of the other girls or athletes. Some gyms have boys and girls. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I think a lot of people may have been subjected to this type of stuff, not only the Olympic team members or Olympic hopefuls, right? I think there's a large majority of girls that are in college, right? Because they were level 10 for several years. Even girls that weren't in college did level 8, level 9, that can identify and relate to a lot of these cultural issues. And so anyway, where does that culture come from? And I think that's what this podcast, The Heavy Metals, focusing on the Carolis, is trying to find out. And I think the podcast tries to set it up as this culture of abuse came from the Carolis. And I definitely, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, what is the culture, what specifically are they talking about, how do they attribute it to the Carolis? But one thing that's interesting is Jennifer Say in that, I don't know if it was in the Athlete A documentary specifically, or I follow her on Twitter, or if it's just something she said on Twitter that I read. But I know that she has said that these tactics have been around long before the Carolis. And it was just the Carolis took it to the next level, or maybe not even took it to the next level, but just started winning.
Yeah.
And but she doesn't believe that blaming it all on the Carolis is fair, because she feels that
it was existed here before.
Yes.
And one thing
and
that
maybe
they mentioned,
not to the same extreme or same level.
One thing that they mentioned in the 30 for 30 podcast is that the Carolis kind of perfected this model and made it repeatable to produce champions.
Yes.
And produce Olympic level medal winners.
Medal contenders. Yeah.
So that was it was funny. For me, it's interesting having this discussion about gymnastics, because I'm a fan through you, and so I was very.
And I'm so proud every time you make little jokes that I'm oh my god, that was such a gym nerd thing to say.
Yeah, I am definitely.
Or wow, he saw the deduction there, that. It wasn't just a simple like flex feet, missed handstand, like astute observation. Good job.
So I definitely like feel like I'm like understanding more of like not only like the gymnastics and like the skills, but also just kind of like the strategy behind it, not only at like the Olympic level, but also at the college level. But for me, like I felt a little like weird listening to the like podcast and like being critiqued.
In some emotions, because I was like, the theme is emotions. Like I haven't really gotten much emotions out yet. So okay.
So I felt weird and uncomfortable because I felt like I was judging like gymnastics, and not necessarily judging. I just felt like, wow, like what they were doing was really wrong, and like I went to at Duke. I was a cultural anthropology, or my major was cultural anthropology. And in cultural anthropology, there's this theory of like cultural relativism. So like you shouldn't base you shouldn't base any ideas about like a specific culture based off like your culture, but you should base it based off how like they are in their like environment.
So I was not a cultural anthropology major and know very little about this. So I'm trying to understand what you're saying. So like,
there's basically two juxtapositions. Like there is a standard of all cultures, like human rights. Basically, like we all should have these human rights no matter where we're born, no matter what we have. And then there's also like, well, there are some rights that like are only like Americans should have because they're Americans and that's their American culture. So it's kind of this like seeing things through the lens of like, this is just like universally wrong, or like, is this wrong because like you're looking at it through the eyes of like
so
being a part of.
Can
like,
I
this
give
culture.
like an example that hopefully is not offensive to anyone? But some cultures don't eat certain meats.
Yes.
Right, and so from a culture like ours, where we eat a lot of meat of many different types, we might view that as like, oh, how bad or weird or wrong.
Yeah,
right? In our culture, that it's weird to not eat certain meats for certain reasons, but in their culture,
it's just normal.
That's just normal, and it's not.
There's nothing
bad or weird or wrong about it, and just like
it's just normal.
Yeah, and for them to view us who eat these meats, it's not that we're immoral and wrong, right? Because in their culture, eating this type of meat is like a religious, or I don't know.
It's just what they do.
Right, so we can't judge their culture based on
our principles. Yeah.
Okay, got it.
And so,
but
like,
it doesn't extend to things like murder and genocide, I would assume.
Well,
right?
I mean,
if some culture is like, oh yeah, it's totally fine to like stone women to death, or to like because they were raped, but that is send all the Jews to the Holocaust. Like,
but that is the beauty of like cultural relativism, is that like you can look at a society and be like, hey, like I don't agree with that, but like it's like they grew up with it and that is their normal practice. So who am I to like judge them?
But doesn't that like, oh, I grew up, my parents are racist. Not my parents are not, but like the idea of like, oh, I grew up in a racist society, my parents are racist, so that's fine. Like you can't judge me. Like that's just how I grew up. That's just our culture.
No, but like there are definitely like things that like.
That's okay.
Well, that's some cultural relativists would see like, yeah, you have to look at them and base their like decisions based off like their culture and like how they see things, not based off like this. So it kind of basically takes morality out of it, like.
So there's no like universal human rights. It just depends on what the culture views at the time.
Yeah, they're like they're culture relativists that would be like, hey, like.
Interesting.
You base the morality off of their norms and principles, not off like
our norms and principles. Okay. Well, I think with all these examples really clarify.
But like I think like.
So anyway, back to
so I'm like
why you were feeling weird.
But I was feeling weird and like a little uncomfortable because like I'm not somebody that like grew up in gymnastics like culture. Like as I said
So
earlier.
what was making you feel weird?
Just that, like,
Or you felt like it was so clearly wrong from your non-gymnastics culture?
it's just that, like,
I guess I'm
I'm sitting here and, like, I'm becoming interested in gymnastics through you.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, I hear about this story, and, like, this is not something, like, through you. I'm pretty sure, like, I actually told you about the podcast coming out.
Yes, you did.
So, like,
my ESPN
it just,
aficionado over
like,
here alerted me to the fact.
it's just the fact that, like, I didn't grow up in, like, the gymnastics culture,
Mm-hmm.
and so I am basically, like, an outsider.
Yes.
Like, I'm not part of the gymnet. I'm looking at this, like,
Not
I'm looking
yet.
at I'm looking at gymnastics, and, like, with a critical lens when, like, I'm not a part of the culture.
Sure. Okay.
And so that, like, that is the part that kind of made me, like, a little weird and, like, a little uncomfortable.
So just like if you were to be learning about some other culture that was foreign to you, would
Yeah.
make you
Well, not, like, just to, like,
I guess
I feel like
these
because-
critiques, right?
yeah,
It's different
because-
to learn
yeah,
versus-
because, like,
I guess I'm still not sure what you're trying to.
because gymnastics is not, basically I'm trying to say that, like, I'm an outsider
Mhm.
looking at gymnastics,
Yes.
and, like, I would hate to be, like, critical of gymnastics when, like, this isn't, like, I don't seek out gymnastics. Like, this is not something that, like, I do on a regular.
Or are heavily invested in.
I would just say, like, because I'm an outsider of gymnastics, it was, like, it made me a little, like, uncomfortable kind of looking at, like, basically the way, like, this whole story played out, and kind of putting my own, like, thoughts of how this played out. But that is, like, ultimately, like, how things change, is, like, people looking at it and being like, hey, this is wrong.
Mhm.
No matter whether you're an insider or you're an outsider, like,
Even
this
people
is
within
wrong.
the culture feel
Yeah,
that it's wrong.
yeah.
Yes.
And also, like, at the very first episode, like, I did also kind of feel like I felt bad for Marta and Bella, because
Do tell. How come?
I mean, they basically had to leave their daughter in their, like,
They
Romania.
didn't have to. They chose to. They chose to leave their daughter.
But, like,
They
you
chose
think, like,
to defend.
I'm not saying that like, they chose it for a reason.
Yes, and I feel that many people make that choice. They say, you know, I might leave my whole family, never be able to go back and see them again, but I'll have a better life in America, so it's worth it to me to make that choice. And granted, they seeked asylum. What's the past tense of seek? They sought, thank you. They sought asylum. I've been talking to Ole and Wells, and now I can't speak English. They sought asylum.
Don't blame Ole and Wells.
Sorry, Ole and Wells. And they were able to be reunited with their daughter. Like, the U.S.
Yes.
got, I don't know how, but allowed.
They basically
something
got
came to
asylum
pass that
to
in
be
4
here.
months or so, they were reunited with their child in the United States. So to give a little backstory, we've been talking all this stuff. If you haven't or don't want to listen to the podcast, basically, Marta and Bella Caroli are coaches of gymnastics, elite gymnastics, and they are known for being verbally and physically abusive to the gymnasts. And they are also known for, Bella specifically, seeking out a much younger age of gymnast than prior. So there is this conception, like, oh, by the time you're 16, 18, like, you're too old to be a gymnast. Like, oh, you're 20, geriatric gymnastics. Like, but if you look at the history in Olympics in this, like, 60s and prior, most gymnasts were past age 20. In the early 70s, Nadia Comaneci is the youngest one, age 14, Bella's protege, right? Like, he was one of the first to really find young gymnasts and push them hard to get to the same level while they were still young, right? It wasn't uncommon for many gymnastics federations to seek out 6 and 7 year olds and start them on this elite gymnastics path.
Yeah.
That was very common. But to accelerate the path so that they're ready to win the Olympics at age 14 versus age 20 was something, from my understanding, and I could be wrong, but that Bella really pushed for. And you'll notice that a lot of his athletes were on that younger age, like Kim Zmeskal. Mary Lou Retton was one of the older ones, and I don't exactly know, but I think she was 18, right? And there's still this conception that, like, oh, everyone in the Olympics, female gymnasts are so young, but even at the most recent 2016 Olympics, the average age was over 20 of female gymnasts at the Olympics.
Of all gymnasts?
Of all gymnasts. So there is, I think, this, somehow we have this conception that, like, if you're 14 and 16, like, that's the peak. But it doesn't have to be, is what I'm trying to say. And that stat might not be quite correct. It might have been of the medalists, the people that won medals at the Olympics, the age was like 20, average age. I don't actually know across all. But, so I think that is one thing that plays a role, is you're not just being mentally and verbally abusive to 26-year-old football players, or like 26 to 40, right? What's Tom Brady's age? Like 42, and he's like way old. These are young girls. Girls or boys, doesn't matter. These are young children and should not be being slapped, punched, physically
not
assaulted,
allowed to eat.
Not allowed to eat. Like, some of these girls, it was so sad. Like, they would talk about how they would be so hungry they would eat toothpaste at night so that they didn't fall asleep, like, so that just they had something in their stomach. And talking about just dreaming of food all day. And it's pretty clear that a lot of these athletes were severely malnourished. And so that's, I think, the eating, the hitting and pushing, I think, is one of those things that culturally, some cultures might say that's really not a problem, that's how we discipline. But I don't think, based on the testimony we heard from some of the past gymnasts, I don't think that those behaviors were used punitively in all cases. Like when the one gymnast showed up,
it was used to get like a specific results.
Well, I'm talking about
they wanted to create I feel like Marta and Bella wanted to create a discipline, and like a lot of times when people talk about spanking their children, they use the idea of, I'm trying to discipline them.
Yes, and so that's my point, is I don't think, sure, in some cases, maybe they were violent against the children for disciplinary reasons, but not in all cases. Like Trudy, she talks about how she shows up day one, like it's her first time at the training center. So another thing, which is not unique to Marta and Bella, but the children would be shipped away from their families and live at the training center and train with Marta and Bella. So like their mom would be gone, right? And they would have a little room that they would share with a roommate, another gymnast, and they would live there. And that's how, you know, like parents couldn't be bringing them food. Like that's how Marta and Bella controlled everything that they ate and everything. But she talks about how it's her first day, her mom leaves, and Bella like hits her really hard, like before anything has really happened, right? Like that wasn't like a punishment for doing anything. I think it was to establish a certain power dynamic and a certain fear, so that
you don't challenge.
Yeah, so maybe it's like a proactive punishment, like you haven't done anything wrong, but I'm going to do this to make sure you don't. So, but I don't think that's.
So you obviously have like a much greater knowledge of all of this, but like.
But so wait, I wasn't quite done.
Okay.
The other thing I think that they did that falls under the abuse category is not only encouraging but forcing athletes to train with serious injuries. I think that's another form of abuse. There's been plenty of times where athletes would have stress fractures, like broken bones, and they would still, because of this fear, like they were too afraid to speak up and say, I'm injured, I need to not do this. And oftentimes if they did say that, they would be made to do it anyway, or then they would be punished. So they learned to not say anything. And whether or not Marta and Bella was like, I truly knew that they were injured and were making them do it anyway, or it was like, oh, I didn't know they were injured, but it's like you created this environment where they were too afraid to say anything. Anyway, so those are the three main ways. I think the depriving them of food, forcing them to train and compete while injured are the two main ones, and then physically interacting with the kids. So anyway, so what were you about to say?
Well, I was just gonna say that, like, you obviously have like a knowledge and like of the like Marta and Belly like history, but specific to like the documentary, like I felt like a lot of the tactics they used, it was like, it is like seen in other sports, like whether like you're trying to get somebody to lose weight, you see a lot of like female athletes, because like they don't want to gain weight, they go on like diets and like really unsafe and unhealthy diets,
or they develop eating disorders, right?
Yeah, and like, and even like you look at a sport like football, like guys are like so like determined to like gain weight that they are like really like doing unhealthy things to their body.
I'm sure in wrestling, you know, like I'm sure there's plenty. I don't think it's unique to gymnastics to have
and
some
like,
of these problems.
Yeah, and I mentioned that to say that like I do think that like Marta and Bella like took the like physical and emotional like violence to an extreme.
Yes.
And like it made me like so sad for those girls that literally and Simone Miles like said it, like they just wanted to like reach their dreams, and they wanted to like be the best and represent our country, and hopefully like win a gold medal. But like USAG and Marta and Bella and like the whole system kind of let them down, and that really like it broke my heart, just to kind of see like USAG like sell its soul, basically.
Yes, and since I have not been doing well with the emotions part of this, but when I listen to this podcast, when I hear anything about the Larry Nassar case and how like I was saying, all the million different pieces that enabled this abuse to take place, I feel two things. And the first and foremost is just sorrow. Like sorrow for the pain and suffering of these athletes. And sorrow that something that has the potential to be so beautiful and so empowering and such like an awesome experience was turned into the opposite of that. Do you know what I mean? Like, I love gymnastics with all my heart, right? And for it to be something that causes extreme pain and anguish for someone causes me sorrow, right? Like I have sorrow and empathy for this terrible situation these women endured, but I also have personal sorrow at like this vehicle of gymnastics has the possibility to do so many great things, and have be such a great influence in someone's life, and for it to be the opposite is just devastating. And sorrow that so many people did not do anything when they could have. And I think that's kind of the second feeling that I have is just disgust, like at the pit of my stomach. Like, no longer am I shocked. Like, I've heard all the things about how women at MSU reported 20 years ago that they were being abused by Larry Nassar. Their coach told them to go apologize to Larry Nassar for like the slander, right? Or like, you don't understand the treatment that you're getting, right? And all the people at MSU that knew or that complaints have been filed, right? Like Larry Nassar's boss, that Strample guy, he also had sexual abuse problems of his own. But like, time after time, these complaints would come in and Strample would just look them aside, right? Or like, USA Gymnastics knew that this assault case or there were suspected incidences, let him continue being the team doctor for a while. And when they finally decided maybe that wasn't a good idea, they were like, let's just tell everybody you're sick. And he was like, okay, great. Like, that came from USA Gymnastics. Like, what a wrong thing to do. And Steve Penny not telling the FBI for so long. And when the FBI finally does get involved, it's like years and years and the FBI still hasn't come to a conclusion. Like, there's a separate part of the FBI investigating the original FBI that was involved for like, how come this is taking so long and how come nothing was happening?
Yeah.
Right? And there's just so many other things with Marta and Bella too, right? Like, Larry Nassar reported directly to Marta. They controlled what the girls ate, they controlled where the girls went, they controlled every single aspect of their lives. And you can make the argument that Bella and Marta didn't know what was happening. That may or may not be true. I can't really speak to what they did know or didn't, but it's like, you created this environment where the girls were too scared. Like, Allie Raisman has been on the record saying she was too scared to say that at the ranch, which is where Marta and Bella trained the national team. So for backstory, the ranch is where Marta and Bella lived in Texas, back in the middle of nowhere. It's like 200 miles from the nearest hospital. Perfect for when you have high-level elite gymnastics breaking their bones all the time, right? It's like a bumpy car ride, 2 hours to the nearest hospital. That doesn't seem safe. Cell phones don't work. That doesn't seem safe. And this is all on purpose. Like, Marta and Bella have gone on the record many times saying, like, we want it to be distraction-free. There's no phones, there's no communication. Like, they're there to do gymnastics and focus on gymnastics, and they know it, right? And so they controlled literally everything. They would go through, girls would come in, and Marta and Bella would go through their things to make sure they don't have contraband food items. When they do, they get in big trouble for it, right? For them to control everything and not know about this seems suspect to me. But again, I truly don't know what they did or didn't know. But for them to create an environment where, like, the girls are too scared to say, like, we don't have soap in our showers, right? Like, that's what Allie Raisman has gone on the record saying, like, I was afraid that it would jeopardize my place on the national team for me to bring up this thing that seems like a critique when you're speaking out about, like, hygiene needs. Yeah. Like, that's not something an athlete should be afraid to say, like, hey, we need some more soap, or like, this soap isn't good enough, right? But like, they're so afraid to talk about, I need more food, I need some ice, I need more rest, I'm injured, I need to not do this. Like, all of that is they're so afraid and have been conditioned that anytime they bring those things up, it won't be listened to anyway. Of course abuse is going to happen and continue on because everyone's going to be too afraid to talk about it, or they're going to think, like, if I do say anything, it's not going to be taken seriously, even if I do have the courage to say something. And that just fills me with, like, blood roiling disgust. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
I'm just like, how can a human being do that? And especially to children. Like, I just don't understand.
No, it definitely is, like, there is no understanding of it. Like, we just like, you hope that like justice will be served, and that like, it kind of like, I said the word hope there, and like, and I look at USA Gymnastics now, and like, I don't have hope for them going for the future, because like, I feel like hope is just kind of giving them the benefit of the doubt that they're going to turn it around.
Time and time again. We've been talking about the dumpster fire that is
but
USA
I do,
Gymnastics for the past
but
like
I
8
do
years.
wonder how like, I wonder like how like USA Gymnastics and just like gymnastics in general and like the systems and the cultures, like they create a way to like keep the kids safe.
Yeah. Because I do have
like,
hope for the gymnastics community and for gymnastics. Maybe not for the organization that is USAG, right? Like I firmly.
But how can you separate the two?
You can easily separate the two, right? Like, do you have hope for the entity of football or like the Broncos or the Cowboys, right? Like the team, the entity, the organization might be complete trash and might get, you know, done away with and a whole new one comes in place, but the entity of football and the community of everybody that loves and engages with football is still in place. Like, to me, those are totally separable.
I kind of get what you're saying, but like, I kind of see like, I do think that like gymnastics just as like a sport that like is competed at, like I do think that like it has value and like it will always like be something that is like celebrated and practiced and will bring a lot of joy.
It's not going to go
people.
extinct.
Yeah, but like as far as like USA like gymnastics, I don't have any like, I don't have any hope for like USA Gymnastics.
Oh, me either.
Like,
Yeah, the organization USAG, I have no hope.
So I guess that like that is my. I guess I kind of agree with you there.
Okay.
But like in turn, like in kind of like, I think to like have hope for like USAG or like to give like to think of Marta and Bella in a positive light is to like, I brought this up the last time, but to like give them the benefit of the doubt.
Right.
And like, I am just like done with giving
White people the benefit of the doubt.
Well, not just white people, just like.
I'm teasing, but based on what we were talking about in the last podcast, it was more of the.
I'm done giving the benefit of the doubt.
doubt.
Like, I definitely think like Marta and Bella like were aware, and they like wanted to have like plausible deniability, and so they created a system to like have plausible deniability.
Interesting. I don't quite go as far as you. I am still willing to say that maybe they didn't know explicitly what was happening. But like I said, they controlled every aspect of those gymnasts' lives, and Larry Nassar would go to the bunks where the campers are sleeping at night after hours for treatment. And it wasn't like Marta and Bella didn't know this. Like, they knew that it would be like, oh, lights are out at 9. It's 9:15. Larry's gonna go treat Michaela Maroney. Where's he gonna do that? In her bedroom. That's fine. We're aware. Yeah, sure. Like, they knew that things like this were happening. Maybe they didn't know that what was occurring during those periods of time was not treatment and it was abuse instead. But what is a grown man doing? Like, there are things like, I'm not gonna say that all grown men would be doing that in that scenario, but just like, there are things.
There were no safeguards.
There are no safeguards in place, right? Like, we talked about this. If it was LeBron James, like, the status quo is not, oh, we're gonna go give our team treatment in their rooms after hours. Like, LeBron James would have to request that, and it would have to be approved by numerous people, because that's not the standard operating procedure, right? You go to the treatment room to get treatment, and you go during a specific period of time. Like, there's practice, and then there's treatment, or like there's a schedule, right?
Yeah.
And like, it's at a time and place where there are other people getting treatment as well, right? Or like if it needs to be private, like that. But it's like in the designated areas for this.
Yeah, there are precautions taken to
yeah, right. So anyway, I can still potentially say that maybe they didn't know exactly what was happening, but I do think that they were aware that something wasn't quite right. And part of that goes back to the environment that the Karolis created of having athletes compete all the time, even if they're injured. So I think part of the reason they kept Larry Nassar around, keep in mind he was not licensed to practice medicine in the state of Texas, but that's where the Karolis lived and where the ranch was. So again, safeguards, right? Like you have a medical practitioner for your team, your national team of the United States isn't even licensed to practice. Like he was licensed to practice in Michigan, but not in Texas. Like that doesn't happen. We're not going to have the Cowboys, their team doctors. I guarantee are licensed to practice in Texas, right? Like, aren't the Cowboys in Texas?
Yeah.
Okay, just checking. You had this look on your face, and I was like, maybe I'm being. But like they're and he was a volunteer, right? Like you're gonna tell me that your NFL team doctors are volunteers. This isn't a paid position. Like your Olympic athlete, Michael Phelps's doctor is a volunteer. Like you would never have that for your gold medal winning swimmer, right? The USA swim team has doctors that are on staff and are paid, right? But Larry Nassar was willing to forego a lot of these things because it was like this is all Mike. Now we're delving beyond fact and into my conjecture. It is fact that he was volunteer. It is fact that, all those things I just said, not licensed, all that stuff. But I believe that he would, and I mean, I think it makes sense if he's giving athletes treatments that really don't, athletes would go in for knee or ankle injuries and he's giving them these invasive vaginal treatments. Obviously, they're not getting the actual treatment for their injury, but I think he was willing to tell Marta, she's not that injured. She doesn't need a cast, right? There's plenty of times where girls on the national team would have like their feet in boots, be on crutches. It's like time for the meet. Off comes the boot, on goes the gymnastics. And it's like, if you're on crutches for the regular day, you should not be doing gymnastics. Like that doesn't seem compatible with the healing process. I don't know what doctor is like saying that this is the right thing to do. But I think that happens in other sports too sometimes. Like you'll have your foot in a boot, but then you'll go compete.
Yeah, and like from my understanding, like you get put in a boot to like take pressure off the joint, and so like
right. But if it's like if your joint needs pressure off it, you probably shouldn't be playing later on. Like you should probably just be letting.
I'm gonna plead the fifth on this.
So this is what I'm saying. A lot of these things are not specific to gymnastics, but anyway. I think that Larry Nassar was willing to kind of be wishy-washy on the medicine in order to tell Marta what she wanted to hear, which is this athlete is good to go and compete. And Marta was willing to be wishy-washy on the like regulations and procedures and be like, yeah, we'll cut some corners. Like, you want to treat athletes at night? Sure, right? So that's my personal belief, but also something very interesting that I found out just today. So Steve Penny was the CEO of USA Gymnastics while all of this took place, and has been charged with trying to cover up some of this stuff. So, for example, when the police went to raid the ranch to get all the medical documents that pertain to Larry Nassar's treatments, Steve Penny called one of his assistants to go there and take the documents away before the police got there. So tampering with evidence. And also there's the whole like, you knew for a long period of time and didn't tell any authorities about this, so like you failed to report. When you did report, like you created excuses to not tell, like, oh, I mean, it was Ron Gallimore, a different person, that came up with the idea to say that Larry Nassar was sick instead of saying he's been accused of sexual assault. But Steve Penny signed off on it. What else? There's so many things that Steve Penny did. The FBI agent that came to investigate, Steve Penny was like, go easy on it and I'll give you a job here at USA Gymnastics. So that's not okay. The list goes on and on, but and you can look that up. But anyhow, Steve Penny, I found out. So basically, the moral of the story is Steve Penny tried really hard to make this go away, right? So Michaela Maroney came out with all these issues with Larry Nassar, and Steve Penny had her sign an NDA and basically like paid her off to say nothing. And that was before, my understanding is that was before the public kind of knew about the Maggie Nichols and everything else. I could be wrong on that though, but I know for a fact that she was made to sign an NDA and was given a large sum of money to basically be quiet, so that it didn't become a media explosion, essentially. So he tried very hard throughout this whole process to not admit culpability and to keep it as quiet as possible. Where did Steve Penny work before this? USA Cycling. And what was the big crazy thing that was happening? Was Lance Armstrong being on performance-enhancing drugs. And Steve Penny was aware and tried to cover that up too. And I had no idea about that. And now, like, I just found out today that he was the chairman over there and was like this great sports marketer and really did a great job getting USA Cycling through that whole debacle, and was aware and actively trying to like not let the secret out that Lance was on performance-enhancing drugs, even though he knew that it was against the rules. So I think that just goes to show what type of person Steve Penny is. So now he comes over here to work for USA Gymnastics. Of course, like, what has he been doing in the past? Try to, like, not have culpability and smooth over these, like, terrible issues. And so, of course, when he's here at USA Gymnastics, it's not all of a sudden, like, I'm going to do the right thing. I'm going to, like, report right away, get the police involved, like, tell the FBI. It's like, no, I'm going to try to cover this up. I'm going to try to pay people off. I'm going to try to, like...
Well, I definitely think that, like,
so
I knew
angry.
that, like, Steve Penny had, like, a marketing background, and he really wanted to, like, kind of build up, like, USAG and, like, kind of promote it and kind of get it out there. And it's funny thinking about, like...
Well, and that's why he liked Marta and Bella so much, because they provided these champions that he could make bank off of, right? Like Gabby Douglas, tons of money. Simone Biles, tons of money, right? Like, there's a lot of people in the gymnastics community question whether Gabby Douglas getting the second on this. Okay, so take it back. Gabby Douglas, first African American woman to win the all-around in 2012 Olympics. She also made the 2016 Olympic team. I have looked at the numbers. A lot of people, gym nerds, have looked at the numbers, and I believe. My personal belief is that she earned her spot on the team based on her performance. If you look at so the way Olympic trials worked is it was not all about all-around rankings. They looked a little bit at all-around rankings, but also what team of 5 members would make the highest, like the strongest team. Mm-hmm. And the team of 5 members that would score the highest at the Olympics was the same team that was chosen except for one member. And this is all based on performance at Olympic trials. So you average the score each gymnast got across both days. Mm-hmm. And that gymnast was Ashton Locklear. But Ashton Locklear could only compete 2 events, whereas Gabby Douglas could compete all 4 events. And because Marta and Bella's training tactics are so abusive, they get into this situation many Olympics over. Many Olympics and World Championships where they're like, crap, we have a team of 7 and 4 of them are seriously injured and can't compete anymore. Or like, crap, we have a team of 5 and 2 of them are seriously injured, but we need to put up 4 people. Like, so because of their coaching tactics of everybody's injured all the time and can't compete, but can't say they're injured, so they still try to compete until their leg is literally facing the other way.
Yeah.
Like, and so then they get into a situation where they're like, well, crap, we don't have enough athletes to do the competition. So then they try to make sure that the athletes that they have can fill in for other people that get injured, right? So it's someone that can only do 2 events in a team event that needs people up on all 4 events is not attractive, right? They would much rather have that girl that even if they only plan to use her on 2 events, if one of the other girls got injured, she could do all 4.
Yeah.
So that's where Gabby comes in, and with Gabby on the team instead of Ashton, that actually makes the 2nd highest scoring team. So it makes perfect sense, right? If you're like, well, I want to have the highest scores, and I want to make sure to give myself a little bit of insurance in case somebody gets injured, right? So, like, because of that, I firmly believe that Gabby earned her spot. Gabby also has a crazy quality of doing pretty well, but then getting to the Olympics and doing way better than she's ever done before in her life. Both of the Olympics were like that. Like, leading up to the Olympics, she was doing good, but not amazing. And then she gets to the Olympics, and you compare her routines, and it's like, this is a whole nother gymnast.
Yeah.
And Marta and Bella also take that sort of stuff into account. So I'm not trying to say that Gabby was gifted her spot on the team and didn't deserve it. I personally believe she deserved it. But many people on the Insider Gymnastics stage feel that she was given a spot on the team unfairly. And 2 of those people are national team members. One was a male national team member, so like this decision didn't affect him in any way.
Yeah.
I think it's easy for someone to be petty or disappointed, like if they were the person that wasn't chosen, to be like, you got it unfairly, like, see what I'm trying to say? Like, it's people that are involved, but it doesn't affect, they're not affected.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have any credibility on that. But based on Steve Penny's track record, I would not put it past him whatsoever, right? Like, Gabby Douglas was the first African-American woman to win the all-around in the previous Olympics. She already has a ton of media and a ton of public, like, the public
fanfare,
knows about her fanfare. And it's the first time in a long, I can't tell the exact number, but the first time in a long time where the defending, like, the prior Olympic champion is coming back to defend her title. In the past, like, 20 years, the Olympic champion has retired after the Olympics. And so that in and of itself is a whole nother, like, marketing thing, like, you know, like, even if she didn't have fanfare before, it's like, oh, now she...
Yeah.
So, like I said,
there are very good
see
reasons for, like, not only, like, gymnastics reasons, but also marketing reasons to bring her back and have her compete.
Yes.
In back-to-back Olympics.
Right. So yeah, who knows? But the whole, I think even just the concept that we're considering that as, like, oh yeah, knowing Steve Petty, that's legitimate. Like, that's a problem. You know, like, Steve Penny should not be like making decisions on who's on the Olympic team. The Olympic team should be made up of the people who, in the competition for determining who gets on the team, earn their spot based on their gymnastics performance, not based on their marketing potential. And the fact that he's willing to do that is, like, totally unacceptable.
So, like, I am not defending
Here
Steve
it comes,
Penny,
guys.
but, like, I do understand, like, he's running a business. Like, he has to try and, like, in any business, marketing is part of the business.
Yes, but the biggest marketing thing is USA winning gold. And if you are putting people on the team that are not as good, you're jeopardizing your chances of winning gold. But you just said
that she earned her spot.
No, I totally. So I see where you're coming from, and I do agree that this is one of those instances.
So,
where
like, I feel like the two things, like, the two gymnasts are equal in, like, competition ability. One has proven her ability at a prior Olympics, and she has fanfare. Like, I feel like that it was an easy choice to choose Gabby. And so, like, even, like,
So I agree.
And
it
I
was
feel
an
like
easy choice
anybody-
to choose Gabby based on her gymnastics, but I don't think that her prior. I don't think, because I guess what I'm trying to say is this situation is hard because I think she deserved it based on her gymnastics performance. But I think it's an easy slippery slope for us to get to a situation where maybe she's in a place where she doesn't deserve it based on her current gymnastics performance, but she's still put on the team based on her past performance and her fanfare. And I don't think that would be fair.
That would not be fair, but I don't think that's what happened. And
It's not what happened in this case, but some people think...
Has that happened before? Like, has there ever been a time in years, and I feel like we're getting on kind of a tangent here.
Well, speaking of
like,
emotions, I'm getting very riled up, so...
But I don't think that, like,
That's not your fault.
I'm an outsider, but I have not heard of a time in USA Gymnastics where, like, somebody made the team because they had a bigger fanfare.
And I agree with you. I'm not aware of that either. But my point is, the fact, like I said, I believe Gabby firmly earned her spot.
Mm-hmm.
In the event that she was considered for the spot for reasons outside of her gymnastics ability at the time, is irrelevant because her gymnastics ability at the time earned her spot. But just if that's being considered, I don't think that's fair. Because of the scenario, like, what if Gabby wasn't doing as well? Do you know what I mean? If it's a different scenario, defending champion
But I
is
think,
coming
like,
back.
I guess in my opinion, that other stuff, like the fanfare, it only came into effect because the two were like comparably equal.
And this is why I'm saying I don't think the two were comparably equal. But
how did you just like?
No, I said she earned her spot gymnastics based on the gymnastics.
Okay.
Some people
don't think she earned her
yes,
spot.
some people would argue that she didn't earn her spot based on the gymnastics, and other people were more deserving of her.
Okay.
I don't agree. Like, I don't hold that opinion.
Yeah.
But based on, like, I will say this: the Olympic selection procedures are not like, oh, you win Olympic trials or you place top 5. It's not cut and dry. It's how you do at Olympic trials, and also how you've done at every competition for the past year, including all the national team training camps that only Marta and Bella and the national coaches get to see. Us fans don't get to see the scores or see what goes on there, right? So it's very subjective, and there's been plenty of times in the past, not just the 2016 selection process, that have been like, how on earth did you guys arrive at this group of gymnasts? And
you think that's unfair?
Not necessarily, but because I do think the USA has a lot of depth, and so it is one of those things where, based on the priorities of the person doing selecting, you could select like 10 different teams, right? So like some people might say, I don't prioritize having that athlete also be an alternate because I have actual alternates that I will use. They don't need to be like, the team of 5 doesn't need to be standing in as an alternate for if someone else of the 5 gets hurt because I have those actual 2 alternates later on. So I prefer to maximize individual medals, or I prefer to maximize some other, like, you could have different priorities and choose a different team.
Mm-hmm.
I personally prioritize the priorities I hold, and based on what I have observed, led me to, if I were to choose the team, would have chosen a very similar team as what was actually chosen.
Okay.
I don't know that the selection committee shared my priorities. I just know that our results got very close. I would have had one different athlete actually, but I can see reasons, logical gymnastics reasons for why the 5 that were chosen were.
Okay.
That being said, if 3 of the 5 had been swapped, I could see logical arguments for that as well.
Yeah.
But the fact that it's like logical arguments for this, logical arguments for that, like, that's where things can get messy with like, oh, this athlete also has like marketing potential. I'm going to keep that in the back of my mind when I'm making these choices. I don't think that's fair. That's why I don't think Steve Penny should have a say in who's on the team or not.
I would say like your marketing potential should definitely be like, it should be like, maybe it should definitely be down the line, and
But
like
it should
your
be a
gym,
consideration.
but like it should be down the line. But like if the two are equal, like I would always give the boost to the person that like has the marketing potential.
And I would agree with you if the two athletes were like equal in all other regards, but one athlete has said like horribly racist things. I'd be like, oh, we're definitely going with the other athlete, right? Like, I agree with you. Like, I do agree that in some regard,
Okay.
that might play a role. But that should never like outweigh the actual. We're getting off on the rails.
Well, I think we are
Anyway.
going to call it a night here. Thank you guys for
Clearly,
paying
this
attention.
is a passionate topic that I could talk about for hours. But
Yes.
overall, I feel like I would like to conclude by just saying that the whole culture of elite gymnastics and high-level gymnastics, I think, is very sick, and it brings me a lot of sorrow. And thinking about how something that these athletes have been working towards for their whole lives and are so proud of and loved so much got turned into something that brought so much harm and pain is sorrowful.
It is definitely a sad situation.
So that's what we've been doing.